All right, so today we're diving into some pretty interesting political waters. I would say the censure of Representative Al Green.
Yeah,
And we've got two really great sources today to help us understand not only what happened, but why it even matters.
right.
We've got USA Today and CNN.
Great sources.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into this one.
Yeah, this should be interesting.
Yeah, so let's set the stage.
Okay.
So President Trump is giving his congressional address, and Representative Green, a Democrat from Texas, interrupts him,
Uh-huh.
shouting, "You don't have a mandate."
Hmm.
I imagine that got people's attention.
Yeah, I would say that's kind of a bold move.
Yeah, I would say so.
Very interesting for sure.
Yeah, so it led to the House voting to censure him.
Right.
And censure's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, it's a huge deal. It is a very serious rebuke, second only to expulsion
Wow.
in terms of severity. And it's how Congress officially condemns a member's actions.
So not just a sternly worded email.
No.
Okay.
No, not at all.
What actually happens during censure?
Yeah.
Is there like a ceremony?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a process.
Okay.
So the member being censured has to stand in the well of the House,
Okay.
which is that central area like by the speaker's podium.
Right.
And listen, while the resolution detailing their offenses is read aloud to the entire chamber.
Oh, wow.
Pretty intense.
That's like full-on public shaming.
Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah.
It's meant to be a very public rebuke, for sure.
Interesting. And the vote itself
Yeah.
wasn't just a party line split either.
Right.
10 Democrats actually voted with the Republicans to censure Representative Green,
Yes.
which is pretty unusual.
Very unusual.
What do you make of that?
Well, I think it shows, some strategic calculations that some Democrats are making.
Okay.
And some Democrats argue that protests like Green's, even if they agree with the sentiment, ultimately distract from the bigger picture.
Right.
And they worry that it makes presenting a unified front against the administration much harder.
So it's this tension between, making a statement, but then also, maintaining party unity for the sake of getting things done.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
a delicate balance.
And it also makes you wonder if those 10 Democrats maybe are trying to appeal to more moderate voters back home,
Sure.
especially because a few of them represent districts that Trump won in the last election.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that, it shows that they're really trying to balance their own principles with the realities of their districts.
Right.
And so, they're kind of walking this tightrope in a way.
Yeah, they're in a tough spot.
Yeah, it is a tough spot. And I think it really underscores how individual actions in Congress are often driven by, kind of this complex web of motivations.
Totally.
It's not always as simple as it appears on the surface.
Right. And speaking of motivations, USA Today actually listed those 10 Democrats by name,
Okay.
and most of them are considered centrists.
Uh-huh.
But censure isn't the only consequence that Representative Green is facing, is it? Didn't I read something about the House Freedom Caucus wanting to take things further?
You did. The House Freedom Caucus is pushing to strip Representative Green of his committee assignments,
Wow.
which is a huge deal.
Okay, so help me understand why that matters so much.
Yeah.
What's the significance of committee assignments?
Well, committees are where a lot of the real work of Congress happens.
Okay.
So it's where representatives shape legislation, hold hearings, investigate issues.
Right.
And, being removed from committees really limits a member's influence and their ability to participate in the legislative process.
So it's not just a symbolic punishment.
Right.
It could really impact his ability to represent his constituents.
Exactly. It has very real consequences for the member and for their constituents.
But despite all this, Representative Green doesn't seem to be backing down at all.
He's not.
CNN reported on a pretty remarkable scene during the actual censure vote.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
So he led a group of Democrats in singing "We Shall Overcome" right there on the House floor.
Wow.
It was quite a moment.
That's a powerful image.
Yeah, and some Republicans were furious.
I bet.
And the speaker even had to call a recess to restore order.
Oh, my goodness.
It seems like Representative Green is really determined to make his voice heard no matter the cost.
It seems that way. He's certainly not afraid to stand up for what he believes in.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand why he felt the need to take such a dramatic stand.
Yeah.
And remember, he shouted, "You don't have a mandate" during Trump's address?
Right.
And that outburst wasn't random.
No.
It was specifically, protesting potential cuts to Medicaid,
Uh-huh.
which he believes would be devastating for vulnerable Americans.
Yeah. He's arguing that Trump doesn't have the public support to justify such cuts.
Right.
And he's willing to face the consequences to make that point.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting because it raises the question, is this kind of protest effective, or does it ultimately undermine his goals?
That's a great question, and one that we should definitely explore further. But first, let's take a moment to understand censure in a broader context.
Okay.
Is this a new tactic, or does it have a longer history in American politics?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Because USA Today provided some interesting historical examples that can shed some light on Representative Green's case.
Okay, yeah, I'd love to hear about that. Yeah, well, one example that comes to mind is the censure of Representative Charles Rangel back in 2010.
Okay.
It was a big event. It was the
Mhm.
first censure in almost 3 decades at that point.
Rangel, that name rings a bell.
Yeah.
What was he censured for?
He was found guilty of a whole bunch of ethics violations,
Okay.
things like failing to pay taxes and improperly using his congressional office for fundraising.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was a pretty big scandal.
So his censure was tied to a specific offense.
Right.
What about in the Senate?
Uh-huh.
Has that chamber ever used censure as a disciplinary measure?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
One notable example is the censure of Senator David Durenberger back in 1990. Okay.
He was denounced for a range of ethical lapses, including financial improprieties and misuse of his official position.
It seems like these historical examples are showing a pattern of censure being used for serious breaches of conduct,
Right.
often related to, finances or ethics.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah.
And I think those examples also underscore the idea that censure is a really powerful tool for accountability,
Right.
even for, high-ranking officials.
Yeah.
It's a way of upholding the integrity of our institutions.
It makes you think about Representative Green's case in a new light.
Yeah.
Because his censure wasn't for financial wrongdoing or an ethics violation.
Right.
It was for a protest during the president's speech.
Exactly. That's a key distinction.
Yeah.
His censure was for behavior that some people saw as disrespectful
Right.
or disruptive to the decorum of the House.
But like we talked about earlier, his motivations were really rooted in a deep concern about these proposed cuts to Medicaid.
He was trying to bring attention to an issue that he felt really strongly about.
Yeah. And that's where I think things get really interesting.
Right.
It raises questions about the balance between free speech, the right to protest, and then also the need to maintain order in a legislative body.
It's a tough balance to strike.
It is.
Because on the one hand, you don't want to stifle dissent or punish lawmakers for expressing their convictions.
Right.
But on the other hand, you need some level of decorum and respect for the institution to function.
Exactly. And I think Representative Green's case really forces us to grapple with those competing values.
Yeah.
It's not an easy dilemma to resolve.
No, it's not. And it's also really fascinating to consider the role of political strategy in all of this.
Yeah.
Because CNN's reporting kind of suggested that some Democrats, even those who agreed with Green's message, felt that his protest was ultimately counterproductive.
Yeah, there's definitely a school of thought that says that outbursts like Green's, while maybe emotionally satisfying,
All right.
actually play into the hands of the opposition.
Interesting.
And they can be used to discredit the entire party
Right.
and make it harder to achieve legislative goals.
So it's a question of optics and messaging.
Exactly.
Do you alienate potential allies, or do you galvanize support with a really bold move?
The high-stakes gamble.
Yeah, it is. And I think the fact that 10 Democrats voted to censure Green suggests that at least some members of his own party believe that he miscalculated.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point.
It's a reminder that even within a single political party, there can be a wide range of views on the best strategies for achieving shared goals.
Absolutely. And those internal divisions can sometimes be just as challenging to navigate as the partisan battles between Democrats and Republicans.
We've talked a lot about Representative Green and the motivations behind his actions.
Right.
But what about the House Freedom Caucus?
Yeah.
Why are they so intent on pushing for further punishment?
Well, the House Freedom Caucus is known for its very conservative stance.
Okay.
And its willingness to kind of challenge the status quo.
And in this case, they see an opportunity to make a statement.
Right.
They want to send a clear message that there will be consequences for defying the norms of Congress,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to, challenging the president's authority.
They're also likely trying to leverage this situation to score some political points.
Okay.
So, by pushing for a harsher punishment for Green, they can appeal to their base and portray themselves as defenders of decorum and traditional values.
So it seems like Representative Green is caught in the middle of a much larger political battle.
Yeah.
He's become a symbol of these deep partisan divisions
Right.
and ideological clashes that are shaping our current political landscape.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah,
His case really encapsulates the challenges of navigating a political system that's, increasingly polarized
right.
and driven by conflict rather than compromise.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack, and you've done a fantastic job of helping us understand the complexities of this situation.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
But I'm curious, what do you see as the most important takeaway for our listeners from all of this?
Yeah.
What's the one key insight they should walk away with?
I think the big takeaway here is that Representative Green's censure really highlights the tension between symbolic protest and effective political action.
Right.
It forces us to kind of ask, what are the most impactful ways to advocate for change?
Yeah, that's a question I think a lot of people are wrestling with, especially in today's political climate.
For sure.
It's easy to feel like you have to do something big to get noticed.
Right.
But is that always the most strategic way to go about it?
Yeah, I think it's a tough question.
Yeah.
On one hand, bold actions like Representative Green's can grab headlines and really put a spotlight on important issues.
Right.
They can rally supporters and put pressure on people in power.
But on the other hand,
Yeah.
they can also backfire, right?
Totally.
And maybe alienate potential allies and just make the divisions even worse.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think that's why it's so important to really think about the long-term consequences of our actions.
All right.
Sometimes, working quietly behind the scenes, building coalitions, and focusing on making progress little by little can be more effective than a really dramatic protest.
Right. It's not always about the big splash.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course, there's no one right answer.
Right.
The best approach is going to depend on the situation and what you're actually trying to achieve.
For sure. Every situation is different and requires a different approach.
Exactly.
And I think that's why it's so important to have these conversations and consider different points of view.
Yeah.
Representative Green's case, whether you agree with how he went about it or not, has definitely started a really important conversation about protest in a democracy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a conversation we need to be having,
Absolutely.
especially now when things are so polarized and there's so much gridlock.
It's easy to get caught up in the drama and the outrage. But we need to remember that in the end, we're all working towards the same goal.
Exactly.
The more just and fair society.
Couldn't have said it better myself, and I think that's a good note to leave our listeners on.
Yeah.
While there aren't any easy answers, just talking about these issues is a good first step to figuring things out.
I totally agree. Having open and honest conversations is essential for finding common ground and moving forward together.
Well, this has been really insightful.
It has.
Thanks for breaking it all down for us.
Hey, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in to The Deep Dive.